The yard at Folsom State Prison looked calm at first glance. The sun was bright, the gravel crunched under heavy boots, and the giant stone walls that had stood for more than 100 years cast dark shadows over the exercise field. But that calm was a lie. Every man on that yard could feel it. Something was wrong. A deep tension hung in the air, thick, heavy, waiting for a spark. It happened at 10:03 a.m. A guard in the tower looked down and saw two large groups forming on opposite sides of the yard. One group had men with blue rags tucked into their pockets. The other had men with red laces on their shoes. Everyone knew what those colors meant. They had seen this pattern before. Many times. Crips. Bloods. Both transferred to Folsom over the past 6 months. Both claiming space. Both refusing to back down. But today was different. Today, both groups were moving with a slow, steady purpose, forming walls of bodies, shoulder to shoulder, silent as if waiting for a signal. The tower guard grabbed his radio. "Control, we've got movement, possible yard disturbance." But the radio only crackled. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. Down on the yard, the two groups stepped closer. Guards yelled warnings, but the inmates didn't even blink. The yard waited. The sky waited. Even the wind waited. And then, a loud metal bang echoed across the prison. Not from the yard. Not from the tower. From inside the building. A second bang followed. Harder. Dust shook off the roof. One guard whispered, "What was that?" Nobody had time to answer. Because at that moment, something happened that Folsom officers had feared for years. The yard erupted. Not slowly. Not with yelling first. Not with pushing. It exploded. Men surged forward from both sides. Guards rushed in, waving batons and shouting orders. The tower sirens wailed so loud the air vibrated. The speaker crackled. "All yard units, code red. Code red." But before the officers could even reach the center, the gun towers lost power. The alarms stopped. The lights blinked out. The entire yard fell silent and still, as if the prison itself was holding its breath. And then, the worst part. Folsom's massive iron main gate, the one that should never open without a key, started sliding open on its own. Every guard froze. Every inmate turned. Someone had hacked the control room. Someone inside knew exactly what they were doing. The gate moved another inch. Creaking, grinding, unstoppable. Inside the dim opening, a figure began to appear. A silhouette stepping into the light. A man the guards had not seen in hours. A man who wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the yard. A man who had started trouble at Folsom years earlier. Trouble they never forgot. He stepped fully into the light. And smiled. The yard held its breath. Because everyone knew. When that man smiled, violence always followed. The story freezes here. To understand how Folsom State Prison reached this terrifying moment. To understand why its yard became known as America's Bloodiest Yard. To understand who this man was and how he walked out during a lockdown. We must go back. Way back. Long before the riots. Long before the gangs. Long before the famous songs written behind these walls. Long before Folsom became one of the most feared prisons in the country. Back to when the prison was born. The year was 1880, and the prison had just opened. The stone walls were new but cold. The iron gates were thick and heavy. The cells were small and dark. In those early days, men worked from dawn until dusk with pickaxes, breaking rocks for hours every day. The prison was supposed to change them. Reform them. Control them. But instead, it made many of them tougher. Harder. Angrier. The guards back then had little protection. No radios. No cameras. No warning systems. If something happened, it happened fast. And word spread quickly among inmates when guards weren't watching. The first major riot in Folsom happened only a few years after it opened. It started quietly, just like the modern ones. A disagreement in the yard. A group refusing orders. More joining. Guards rushing in. Inmates pushing back. Folsom's yard had its first taste of chaos. And it wouldn't be its last. Every decade that followed added new problems. More inmates. More pressure. More gangs. More power struggles. By the 1950s, Folsom was overcrowded, understaffed, and full of men who had nothing to lose. Some guards said walking into certain cell blocks felt like stepping into a storm. Whispers followed them everywhere. "This place is a powder keg. One day, it's going to blow. It's only a matter of time." They were right. The explosion came in 1952. One of the bloodiest riots in the prison's early history. It started in the dining hall during breakfast. A small argument between two groups turned into a loud fight. Guards rushed in. Someone shouted. Someone panicked. Pans clattered. Tables tipped over. Chaos spread like fire. By the time it was over, the dining hall was destroyed, officers were injured, and the prison went into full lockdown. But the problems didn't stop. In the 1960s, Folsom's reputation grew darker. The prison became known across the country, not only because of the famous music performance that happened there, but because of what inmates whispered among each other. Folsom has the toughest yard. Folsom has the most dangerous men. Folsom is where the real battles happen. By the 1970s, California gangs were beginning to shape the inside of the prison. Groups from outside brought their rivalries in with them. Street battles became yard battles. Neighborhood alliances became survival systems. Crips and Bloods arrived later, but other groups had already carved territory into Folsom's concrete. The prison became a map. Every bench, every table, every corner, every shower stall, every exercise bar, all claimed. Guards learned to memorize invisible lines. Inmates knew where they could walk, and where they couldn't. The tension never rested. Sometimes, months went by with no incidents. It felt like peace. But it wasn't. It was waiting. A guard once said, "Folsom doesn't relax. It holds its breath." He was right. Because every few years, something big would happen. A fight in the yard. A surprise attack in the dining hall. A planned disturbance in a cell block. A lockdown that lasted weeks. Each event added a new scar to the prison's history. And now, in the modern era, things had grown even more dangerous. Better communication among inmates. Stronger alliances. More organized groups. More tension between rival gangs. Leading to the morning we began with. A riot forming under a bright sun. Radios failing. Gates opening without keys. And a man stepping out of the shadows. As the story now returns to the present moment. The yard frozen. The guards terrified. The Crips and Bloods watching closely. You realize one thing. The gate was not opened by accident. Someone planned it. Someone gave the man power. Someone wanted this moment. The man at the gate took one more step. He raised his hand. Both gangs turned their eyes toward him. The guards braced for impact. And then, a voice shouted from the upper yard. Loud. Panicked. Terrified. "He's not alone." Everyone turned. And what they saw. For a moment, no one moved. The yard held still like a photograph, dust floating in the air, sunlight glaring off the razor wire, and the man at the gate standing there with that strange, calm smile. But then the shout came again, from the upper yard, near the old stone steps that led to the administrative building. "He's not alone." Every head snapped upward. There, standing halfway down the steps, was another figure. A tall man with a shaved head and a deep scar across his cheek. Even from far away, the guards recognized him. He had been moved to a segregation unit earlier that morning, after officers found hidden messages under his bunk. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the yard. But there he was. And he was walking down slowly, one step at a time, like someone who believed the entire prison belonged to him. The guards panicked. The tower officer shouted, "How did he get out OFADSEG?" No one answered. Because they all knew. If two high-ranking inmates were loose at the same time, the blackout and gate opening were not random mistakes. Someone had planned this. Someone who understood Folsom's old electrical system. Someone who understood the yard schedule. Someone who wanted chaos. The man at the gate waited until the second man reached the bottom of the steps. Then he raised his hand, signaling something, silent, subtle, but powerful. And in response, two groups on the yard adjusted their positions. Not fighting. Not attacking. Reorganizing. Even the guards could see it. "Why aren't they charging each other?" an officer whispered. The tower guard swallowed. "Because this isn't about them anymore. It's about that." He pointed toward the gate, the heavy iron gate that had somehow opened during lockdown, the one no one could explain. And behind that gate, as the sunlight shifted, the guards saw something else. Another shadow. Another inmate. Another figure stepping out. The guards lunged forward, shouting for backup, even though they knew backup couldn't hear them. Then, suddenly, the yard lights flickered back to life, not fully, but enough to cast harsh white beams across the gravel. The sudden brightness made everyone squint. Dust sparkled in the air. For the first time, the guards could fully see the man at the gate. and their stomachs twisted. He wasn't from the Crips. He wasn't from the Bloods. He wasn't from any street gang. He was an older inmate from a different generation, someone who had survived the riots of the 1980s and 1990s. Someone who knew Folsom's layout better than most guards. Someone who had a reputation for pulling strings. His name was Martin Ramirez. Back in the 90s, he had been involved in one of the most destructive riots Folsom ever saw, a riot so large it took more than 200 officers to stop. Martin had spent most of his life in prison, moving between blocks, learning the cracks in the system, understanding which guards could be tricked and which ones could be bribed. Some inmates said Martin knew the prison better than the architects who built it. And now he was free on the yard. But that wasn't the strangest part. Behind him, stepping through the gate into the daylight, was a man wearing a tan uniform, not blue like the inmates. A maintenance worker. Or at least someone dressed like one. A guard shouted, "Hey! You! Stop right there!" But the man in the tan uniform didn't run. Didn't flinch. Didn't turn. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out something small, and tossed it to the ground. The object sparkled in the sunlight before landing on the gravel. The closest guard picked it up. It was a key. A master key. One that could open almost any door in the prison. The guard's face went pale. Inside the tower, the officer whispered, "Oh no, no, this is bad. This is real bad." On the yard, Martin Ramirez took another step forward. He looked at the Bloods. Then at the Crips. Then at the guards. He opened his mouth to speak. But before he could say a word, a loud sound cracked through the prison. A deep, heavy boom. The ground shook under everyone's feet. Dust shot out of vents in the main building. Birds scattered off the razor wire. Every guard dropped into a defensive stance. Every inmate turned toward the sound. "What was that?" a guard shouted. Another boom shook the yard, louder than the first. The warden ran out of the building with 2 officers behind him. His face was drained of color. "Everyone back off the yard. Now!" he yelled through cupped hands. But the inmates didn't move. The Crips stood still. The Bloods stood still. Martin Ramirez stood still. The yard felt frozen again. Then the warden screamed something that even the toughest inmates weren't expecting. "It's coming from Lower Block A." Lower Block A. An area beneath the prison. Old. Rarely used. Almost forgotten. Every inmate stiffened at the name. A long time ago, Lower Block A had been shut down because of a riot so intense the prison sealed the entire floor. Rumors said tunnels were down there. Rumors said old escape routes remained. Rumors said men had died in the dark corners of that block and never been found for days. It was a place officers avoided. A place inmates whispered about. A place full of history, dangerous, buried history. And now, something was happening there again. The second man, the tall one with the scar, finally spoke. His voice was calm. Too calm. "It's awake." The guards froze. The inmates exchanged looks. Nobody understood what he meant. Not yet. Suddenly, all the yard lights shut off again. Every bulb. Every floodlight. Darkness swallowed the yard for the second time. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted for help. Guards ran in different directions. In that dark chaos, Martin Ramirez stepped back toward the open gate, as if preparing for something. And then, a siren went off that none of the guards had heard in years. A siren buried in the system. A siren older than the prison radios. A siren used only for one thing. A full facility breach. The warden grabbed his head with both hands. "Oh no, no, not again." The alarm blared. Lights flickered. Dust thickened in the air. Inmates crouched low. Guards scrambled. And while the prison fell into panic, the tall man with the scar turned toward Martin Ramirez and whispered something no one else could hear. But whatever he said made Martin smile again. And then, a massive iron door behind the gate began to rise slowly. Something, or someone, was about to emerge. Someone the warden hoped he would never see again.